Hello, my friends. Rob Roselli coming to you once again on the Not Fox News Network. Today being Tuesday, February the 7th, 2017, and current events are rapidly spiraling out of control. For those of you that are paying attention and not listening to Fox News and the other so-called mainstream media that lie to you, not just by what they say, but what they don't say, as we'll cover in tonight's show. And once again, the website boxofsunglasses.com, email info@boxofsunglasses.com, Twitter @Rob Roselli, and Facebook, of course, Rob Roselli1, as you are now currently listening. Now, we have a lot to cover here. Let's just, I put a question out on Twitter just to kind of review the past several shows that we've gone over, and the hypocrisy of the so-called liberal left and these useful idiots out on the streets, literally on the streets, calling everybody a racist and a Nazi and all this sort of thing. And remember, we talked about this last week. I mean, it's kind of funny. The Democratic Socialists of America are one of the groups behind all these useful idiots. You know, these anti-Trump protesters calling everybody else a Nazi, and the term Nazi means National Socialist. Okay, that's what Nazi stands for in German. So it's just to illustrate the level of idiocy and ignorance of these people is really where it's at. I mean, there's nothing else to say. I mean, Lenin, okay, the leader of the Russian Revolution around 100 years ago, called American liberals useful idiots, and we're starting to see why. Okay, a lot of these leaders, Khrushchev and other Russian leaders, said America would never be taken over from without. It just an invasion was never going to happen until it decayed from within. And basically, it's happening. Okay, and just to go off on that tangent real quickly, and this decay like a termite eating away at a house. And we'll discuss the symbolic meaning of a house here in a second in terms of the New Testament. But in terms of the United States, a termite's eating away at the interior of a house would be these universities, these useful idiot liberals at these universities. And if you follow the money trail back up behind all these people, okay, invariably you end up at what's called the tax-exempt foundations. Okay, Rockefeller, Carnegie, the Ford Foundation, George Soros, okay, is a common, it's one of the more popular names, but have no doubt those other names are behind it. Okay, these are the same names that just so happen to be the founders of the so-called Federal Reserve System, okay, which is about to implode the economy, okay, here in early 2017. It's a mathematical certainty that the economy just collapses under a weight of debt that becomes unsustainable. And I don't want to go too far off into that tangent right now. I mean, we just want to. I mean, the point is that I guess for purposes of right now is that when you look at the panoramic, the money changers are behind the whole quote conspiracy, okay, including Planned Parenthood, okay, the so-called Negro Project, as it was called in its inception, and we'll circle back around this in a few minutes because its purpose, as stated by its founder, Margaret Sanger, was to in fact eliminate the Negro population, okay, in the United States and in fact the world. I mean, let's just face it, okay, this is genocide on the highest order of the highest order. So this is off a website called blackgenocide.org, okay, one word, and I have no affiliation with them whatsoever, so I'm not, this is free publicity for them, but anyway, you can go on that site and you can read all about black genocide, which is abortion, okay, which, just again, these useful idiots calling everybody racist and Nazis and all these other stupid names, advocating for the Women's March, which really was just a stumping for, unfettered, federally funded abortion, okay, so they're calling the Democratic Socialists of America are calling people that support Trump National Socialists, okay, if that wasn't dumb enough, they're calling everybody racist while they're supporting Margaret Sanger's Negro Project, okay, which we know today as Planned Parenthood, okay, so just colored people are like human weeds and are to be exterminated, okay, that's a direct quote from Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, Okay, and we covered this on the last several shows. And by the way, if you go on my site, boxofsunglasses.com, there you'll find links to the YouTube channel, and you can go back into the archives. And we went into some depth, reading directly from Margaret Sanger's books, The Pivot of Civilization, the biography of Margaret Sanger, okay, etc. And we read from Charles Darwin's book, The Origin of Species and the Descent of Man, and the inherent racism, okay, that evolution was and is, and its evil twin / offspring known as Planned Parenthood. We went through that, and again, you can get those links on the YouTube channel, boxofsunglasses.com. You can go back into the archives and listen to what the lovely Ms. Singer had to say about people she considered to be human weeds, morons, misfits, imbeciles, okay, and the like. And of course, on my site, Pleased to Meet You, okay, which is a historical, fictional account, so-called, of a conversation between a Satan character and an O'Brien character who represents the Eastern establishment or owners, the so-called Illuminati or Skull and Bones, whatever you want to call it. And it tries to present the, quote, conspiracy in a more palatable fashion. It's a 1-hour read. The Un-American Genocidal Complex, okay, and just to run, again, to run real briefly through this, the Georgia Guidestones, okay, founded by a guy who goes by the euphemism Robert Christian, okay, and we can go off into a whole thing on Robert Christian. That well runs deep. Suffice it to say for right now, that he represents the rose plus the cross, or the male plus the female, the Rosicrucians, who were known as the Royal Society, okay, back in England, which gave us the British Roundtable groups, which gave us Skull and Bones, okay, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg groups, okay, the usual, the bane of the so-called, quote, conspiracy theorists, okay, but anyway, it could all be chased to this acronym known as RC, or Robert Christian, okay, who just so happens to be the 18th or 6 + 6 + 6 degree Freemasonry, which runs one and the same with the beast, the number of the beast in Revelation, 666. Okay, it's the number of a man, Satan incarnate. Okay, and I don't, that's. If you go in 1 Peter 5:8, you can read all about that. Satan walks the earth looking for souls to devour. Okay, and I believe that Robert Christian fulfills Revelation 13:8, 1 Peter 5:8. Okay, in other words, he's the one behind this thing. Okay, the Eastern establishment, the American Illuminati, Skull and Bones. Okay, who gave us this thing? Okay, the United Nations, which is kind of where the rubber hits the road. The rubber of the, quote, conspiracy hits the road of reality at the United Nations. The environmental movement circles back to these things, okay, calling for the deaths of literally billions of people, okay, again, founded by Robert Christian. So when I use terms like comic book antichrist and goofball Christians and this sort of thing, and, people sitting around waiting for some temple to get rebuilt in Jerusalem, which I highly doubt is going to happen, okay. The reason I say that is because Satan is already hard at work, okay, and this guy, okay, the foundation of Adolf Hitler is documented in this book, okay, spiking the smallpox vaccine with the AIDS virus, okay, we're talking about the deaths of hundreds of millions of people here, okay, at the behest of this crowd, okay, the American Illuminati, the Skull and Bones, the Brotherhood of Death, okay, you're starting to get the picture. Okay, so it's all right here in the Un-American Genocidal Complex, available on my site. And of course, this one's available as a PDF download. They Live, Great Society of the Undead. And of course, we can see the illuminated, all-seeing eye of Apollo or Osiris above your fake Federal Reserve note. As again, the impending debt collapse of the U.S. economy, which is going to usher in the chaos from which the phoenix of the Freemasons, in honor of their sky god, Horus, who was represented as the Egyptian pharaoh way back in ancient Egypt, and his father, the god of the sun, Apollo or Osiris, who's also the god of the underworld. And I don't want to go off into that whole bowl of spaghetti right now, being Greek and Roman mythology, but suffice it to say that this right here, we don't get to this without a bunch of chaos in between, a bunch of chaos and death, as in the deaths of billions of people, as specified in these things, the Georgia Guidestones brought to us by Robert Christian. Okay, so you can start to see the connections, okay, and the word great, I cover the word great, it's really a code name for the god of the underworld, the god of the New Age, the god of ancient Egypt, called Osiris, okay, who just happens to be one and the same with a certain god or leader, king of the underworld, or the bottomless pit, called Apollo or Apollyon in Revelation chapter 9. Okay, so things are starting to get very interesting here. Okay, I'm just barely scratching the surface right now. Barely scratching the surface. This book is several hundred pages, but it's packed with information. But for our purposes tonight, suffice it to say that this capitalist pyramid, this great society that they're shooting for, can't happen until 6.5 billion of us out of a 7 billion or so total disappear, are made to disappear. Okay, you can kind of inch your way there with people like Adolf Hitler and Mao and Stalin and AIDS and this sort of thing, and abortion. Okay, but that's not fast enough. Okay, we're only talking, say 200, 300, 400 million people. With World War II and AIDS and abortion, that's Bush League, okay, that's minor league, okay. To get to 500 million people, minus 6.5 billion people, you need a world war, a third world war, the nuclear war, okay. You got to evacuate the planet of all these people, and that's well on its way, okay. The image of the beast, Obama, did his best to set that up, and the forces behind him, and it's still going to happen, okay. And I know Trump may be an eye of the storm, okay. I don't want to go too off into the tangent of Trump right now, but he's going to be blamed, okay, at the very least, for the mathematical certainty of this thing crashing, okay, which it must, okay. The chaos that will ensue when this thing crashes, okay, is going to be monumental and biblical in magnitude, okay. And we'll circle back around to that concept in a little bit. We'll get into the little bit of the book of James, okay. I might just talk about it right now real quickly, okay. In the book of James, and I think it's James chapter 5, God says, or through the Apostle Paul, you're gathering, the corrupt of the world are gathering gold and silver for the day of their destruction. And I think this goes back to Isaiah chapter 2 of the Old Testament. People will be throwing their gold and silver in the streets as they're running from the invading Babylonians. Okay, that was physical Israel, God's chosen people. Okay, so the point is that they will get theirs. Okay, in the end, the Illuminati, the Skull and Bones, the Eastern Establishment, the New World Order, now it's called a deep state, whatever you want to call it, they will get theirs. Okay, and I guess my goal is, in a small fashion, and I don't know how many people are listening right now, is to get people to put on their sunglasses. Okay, the box of sunglasses in honor of John Carpenter's great movie, They Live. Okay, it's a simple concept. Okay, and that's exactly what I'm referring to when I say box of sunglasses. The simplicity of the whole thing is really astounding. Okay. You don't have to get too complicated, okay? You don't have to go that deeply into it, okay? And we'll just go over that real briefly, but just suffice it to say, just if those books, okay, even my first two books, even this book by itself, spend 2 hours reading this, and it's a real eye-opener, okay? And then, of course, you can go into much deeper research on my site, again, boxofsunglasses.com, but the most important thing to realize is that this is a simple, God's salvation plan is a simple concept, okay. And if you go on my site, there's a link, it's called God's Simple Salvation Plan, Okay, and no, you don't need a lot of procedure. Okay, as a matter of fact, that's antithetical to the simplicity of Christ. Okay, 2 Corinthians chapter 11. If you go in and you read, Lucifer, or Satan disguises himself as angel of light and his ministers as angels of righteousness. Okay, and if you go in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, you can see this in a spiritual sense. You can see this concept of John Carpenter's "They Live." The God of this world, or Satan, has blinded the mind of those that don't believe. Okay, so in other words, and we'll kind of segue into what I'm talking about, and the simplicity of this whole thing. You don't have to be a nuclear physicist, okay? You don't have to be so-called intelligent to figure this out. In fact, so when an economist, for example, and a so-called expert, a PhD level economist from Harvard gets up there and talks a bunch of gibberish about the economy and whatever nonsense and statistics that they fill their heads with all this crap up at Harvard and Chicago Business School and Cal Berkeley and all these places. It's all a bunch of crap at the end of the day. It's all nonsense. Okay, because as I've just stated, you can talk all numbers you want. You can talk all, economic theory and doctorate level nonsense you want. But at the end of the day, okay, you don't need calculus. You don't need statistics. You don't need all this stuff to figure this out. At the end of the day, this thing mathematically, it has to collapse. Okay, it's a mathematical and any logical certainty. Okay, it's a debt-based system. So if you just think about this, okay, this is one of my 4 horsemen of the American apocalypse, by the way. But I might as well just quickly mention them. Okay, I consider the 4 horsemen the Federal Reserve System, which we're talking about right now, and we'll circle back into the simplicity of God's salvation plan. Just trying to make a point, but the second, of course, being evolution, as we've talked about in past shows, and out of evolution sprung the eugenics / population control / radical environmental movement. That's the 3rd horseman, and the 4th horseman, of course, is separation of church and state. Okay, which is the communist-founded ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, pet. That's their pet project, so-called. Okay. I'm not saying that to be funny, okay? The American Civil Liberties Union was literally founded by communists, okay? Norman Thomas and Roger Nash Baldwin and others, okay? And by eviscerating God from the society, from America, okay, they ripped apart the pillars and the foundations on the founding principle on which this nation was founded, which goes back to one of my other horsemen, which is the separation, which is evolution, okay? So you take God out, and evolution kind of comes in at the same time, and then what you're ending up with is an anarchist, a society that tends towards anarchy, which is what we have right now. Okay, everybody's doing right, in their own minds. Okay, and I think that's from 1 Samuel. I can't think of the Old Testament reference off the top of my head, but maybe it was it might have been Joshua. Okay. The book of Joshua, okay, everybody was doing what was right in their own minds in Israel. Okay, they threw God out the window and basically had an anarchist society, which is what we're on the verge of right now. And it's all by design, as I've been saying. Okay, they're our leaders. Okay, our so-called leaders, our real leaders. Okay, our owners. Let's call them our owners. Our Federal Reserve owners are inducing the chaos. Okay, they want the death. These are death merchants. These are worshipers of death. As are their useful idiot underlings out there on the streets, advocating for abortion, the black genocide known as abortion, advocating for Hillary Clinton, a warmonger, and all this other stuff. Now I'm going to go off on that right now. But anyway, the point is, once you recognize the 4 horsemen of the American apocalypse, and especially the one we're focusing on right now, just to circle back to the Federal Reserve System, you realize it is it's very simple, okay, and I'll say it again and again. In John Carpenter's "They Live," Roddy Piper was just an average meatball, okay, on the streets, working stiff, He puts the sunglasses on, and all of a sudden he figures it out. And that's kind of thematically where I'm coming from. Okay, I'm not particularly intelligent. College degree, engineering, all that doesn't mean whatever. I realize there's people that are a lot smarter than me. Okay, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. But that's the point. Okay. Remember 2 Corinthians 4. Satan is blinding many people that don't believe in Jesus. Okay. He's blinding them, and God's letting it happen. Okay, because they've chosen not to believe. Now let's flip that around. Okay, let's look at the apostles. Now Paul was known as Saul of Tarsus. Okay, and he was basically a thug, a hired thug of the temple priests and the priesthood known as the Pharisees. Now, if you go back to the Gospels, yes, it's the same Pharisees. For example, in Matthew 23, that Jesus said, you're condemned to hell. This is Jesus right before his crucifixion, and their allies, the money changers. He chased these guys out of the temple with whips. Okay, the money changers. Money. Okay, 1 Timothy 6, love of money is the root to all evil. Okay, remember before I said follow the money trail. Okay, so I'll go off on that again right now, but that's the symbolism. Okay, at the end of the day, that's the symbolism. Okay, and that's what Jesus was getting at. Okay, the money changers. How do you control the world? Okay, you can try to control it militarily. That doesn't always work out. Okay, military leaders, dictators come and go. Hitler, Stalin, Mao. If you're going to go back in history, Alexander, Genghis Khan, the various Roman emperors, etc., etc. Okay, they all fail. But the money changers, the ones that own all these kings and all these countries, they always survive and thrive. They hide in the shadows, just like their leader, okay, the god of this world, known as Lucifer, and now as Satan. Okay, that's the core. Again, I'll say it again and again. That's the core of the quote conspiracy, and the way we're seeing this played out in our current world is the way we're going to see it play out in the very near future. Here, February 2017, moving forward, is in a debt collapse of biblical proportions. And of course, there's other things going on in the world. There's this World War III that's about to happen. You got this Fukushima nuclear meltdown happening in Japan that nobody's talking about, at least on the mainstream news. You got to go on the so-called alternative news to hear about what's going on with Fukushima. But that's a legitimate environmental disaster. Okay, not like this idiocy known as climate change or global warming or whatever you want to call it. Okay, this nonsense. Okay, well, we spend time on nonsense at best. And really, the climate change agenda is really a play at world governance. Okay, again, brought to us by this crew. The Rockefeller founded the United Nations. The Rockefellers are one of the big advocates behind climate change. The owners of Standard Oil. Okay, stupid idiot liberals. Follow the money trail. Okay, but anyway. So again, the point is, it's not an environmental disaster, but an environmental disaster is Fukushima. But just getting back to where I was, there's a lot more going on besides the impending economic calamity known as the Federal Reserve System, or the collapse of the Federal Reserve System. But right now we're focusing on that because that's what that's going to be tangible. Okay, nobody really cares about the quote conspiracy until it happens, until it manifests itself, and that's one thing that's going to manifest itself relatively quickly. Okay, and again, it's all by design. The system must collapse. If you just think about it, it's a debt-based system, which means money is created out of thin air by the bankers as an instrument of debt. Okay, so it's not backed by anything, so you can have an unlimited amount of withdrawals. Okay, it's utopia. Think about it. Okay, the first question becomes, well, that's ridiculous. If the government can just print money at will, Why do any of us have to work? Why do we need an economy? Why do we have to produce products? Why do we need an IRS? Think about that one. Why do we need a federal tax system if the government can just print money on a whim? Why do we need all this stuff? And the question is, we don't. Okay, it's all a facade to cover up the fact that our system is a debt-based system. Now, of course, the O'Reillys, the experts, the university professors, the economists, so they're all they would laugh at something like that kind of concept, but it's exactly right. Okay. So in other words, another way to look at it is you're a debt slave. Okay, you get to work. Okay, you get to take part in this fake hot air balloon known as the U.S. economy. Okay, and just think about it. I mean, how else? If we got multiple wars going. We got half the country as government workers, which means they produce nothing. Which means that half the people that are employed have to employ half of the government workers. That doesn't count the welfare recipients. And this country has no industry to speak of. I mean, maybe we assemble some cars, maybe there's a few steel plants left over, maybe we make some dog food or something, and a few other things. But most of the heavy industry in this nation has been exported, so we got no industry to speak of. Half the country, more than half the country, is a government worker or on welfare. Multiple wars. Just use your common sense. So how the hell, excuse my French, is all this? How is that sustainable? Okay, the answer is it's not. It's sustainable because we have this scam Federal Reserve system that's supporting it all. Okay, and to keep people from realizing what a scam it is, they keep they keep these little people in this rat race. Called the federal taxation system and state taxes and all this sort of thing, to keep our heads down, okay, and keep us at work and keep us in line. Okay, remember the money changers. Okay, this is, in other words, this is pure evil at its best. Okay, so when the economy, for our purposes right now, when the economy crashes, which again it mathematically must. Okay, I don't care what Joe Blow or Dr. Schmuck from Harvard or Chicago Business School says on Fox Business News or one of these other channels. I don't care. I don't care if the guy's got a 200 IQ, okay, and he's got his doctorate from Harvard. I don't care, okay. At the end of the day, it's a mathematical certainty. It's 100% certainty, okay. It's like gravity, okay. It's that simple, all right. So, and if again, just to go into the other aspects of the quote conspiracy, I mean, just real quickly again, we'll just revisit evolution. Now, I made the analogy last week, or a week before, evolution. Now, if you think about how stupid that is, evolution, basically, the computer you're looking at right now, or the iPhone or whatever, if I were to tell you that iPhone or that computer could evolve from the table or the chair you're sitting on, you'd say, well, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. But that's the crux of evolution. Okay, it's even worse than that, because evolution is saying not only can the computer or the iPhone arise from your desk, but evolution says it can come to life and acquire some kind of morality, all in a vacuum. Now, if you think about how stupid that is, but that's what that's evolution. That's simple, okay? Now, of course, if you say, that creationists can't be scientists and all this, so it's all nonsense. Okay, again, 2 Corinthians 4, verse 4, read that. Okay, remember they live. Okay, this is all very simple. Okay, the Federal Reserve, separation of church and state. Now, agree or disagree with Christianity. Nobody can deny that this nation was founded on Christian principles. And I know I'm going against, other conspiracy theorists out there that say, it was Illuminati, the Freemasons, and the founders were, the Great Seal and all this nonsense. Look, I'm not denying, I know that Benjamin Franklin had some shady friends over in England, the Hellfire Club, this sort of thing. I mean, they called George Washington a Freemason. I disagree with that. He was a Freemason, but he wasn't, certainly, he was the glue that held the greatest nation in the history of the world together through the revolution, through the dark days of the revolution. So I'm not going to concede George Washington was part of the conspiracy. I think that's ridiculous. Just because he was a Freemason. Okay, Freemason in America at that time was more like a social club. Okay, like the, like the Knights of Columbus, or or the Rotary Club or something like that. It wasn't the serious Illuminati, worshippers of death, guys jumping into a coffin and jumping out of it like they do at Skull and Bones up there at Yale University. It was nothing of the sort. Okay. So just getting back. So just to say that this nation, the communists founded ACLU, to say they believe in the separation of church and state is so ridiculous. I mean, the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, okay, Liberty Bell has it inscribed on it, proclaim liberty throughout the land. That's why it's called Liberty Bell. Okay, that's right out of Leviticus 25. Okay, in Philadelphia, named after the church in Philadelphia in the book of Revelation. In Pennsylvania, named after William Penn. Okay, a devout Quaker, a devout Protestant. Okay, so you can see how stupid the whole concept is. Now, we agree or disagree on it's not a Christianity, you believe or don't believe, but this nation, I mean, divine providence, okay, nature's God, is in the Declaration of Independence. Okay, the First Continental Congress on September 7th, 1774, around the time of the Battle of Lexington and Concord, when the Revolution was started, they opened up with the 35th Psalm, okay, and on, okay. The New England Primer, or Primer, however you want to pronounce it. You can get that off on Amazon. That's the book that many of the founders learned from in public school, okay. It quotes right out of the book of Genesis. So to sit here and say, so in other words, you couldn't, if you try to read the New England Primer in a public school today, the American Civil Liberties Union would come in and sue you for separation of church and state, saying that's unconstitutional. Meanwhile, most of the founders that wrote the Constitution learned from that very book. So you can see what an asinine, stupid concept of separation of church and state is. Okay, and of course, again, this led to the whole concept of evolution. Okay, which we just went through. If you combine all that, then you get the radical environmental movement and Planned Parenthood and abortion and climate change and all this other nonsense, which is the fourth horseman of the American apocalypse. Okay, but again, standing behind it all are the money changers, the guys Jesus chased out of the temple with the whips, the worshippers of Apollo or Apollyon. Okay, and Satan. Just in parentheses, Apollo and Apollyon he's a lot worse character than the biblical Satan, by the way. I'd be a little bit more worried about him than Satan himself. But anyway, that's a story for another day. But anyway, for our purposes, they're the same character right now, and our leaders worship them. Okay? So there you have it. Now, just to get back to this concept of simplicity, okay, or this condescension. Let's just start with this. These people, this disdain that so-called liberals have, the American Civil Liberties Union and Harvard and these other so-called experts, okay, for the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and I will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. So much you could be an astrophysicist, but in God's eyes, you're basically a moron. Okay, the creator of the universe. I mean, who are you? Okay, that's what God's saying here. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 1, 17 and 18. And again, this is the Apostle Paul, who had his Damascus road moment, okay, in Acts chapter 9. If you've ever heard the term, your Damascus road moment, that's where it comes from. The Apostle Paul was converted instantaneously from a Pharisee, okay, basically a thug of the aforementioned Pharisees and money changers. Okay, he was having, the initial Christians, the first Christians, after Jesus was ascended on Pentecost, okay, back there in Acts chapter 1, okay, the Apostle Paul was running around having these people imprisoned, stoned to death, killed, and this sort of thing. Okay, so he did a complete 180, courtesy of Jesus himself, and you can read about that on the Damascus Road. in Acts chapter 9, but this is him writing in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, basically saying, I don't care how smart you say you are in this world as a human, to the creator of the universe with an IQ of infinity, you're nothing, you're stupid, you're a moron, okay, is what this is saying. Now, just to real quickly, you can go back to, I think, Isaac Newton. Okay, and I'm going to paraphrase. Now, Isaac Newton, the jury's out. Was he a devout Christian? He was a member of the Royal Society. He was involved with the Rosicrucians. I mean, like, I don't know. I'm not the judge. I'm not the judge of the world. Okay? There's only one person that fits that bill, and he died 2,000 years ago. But anyway, Isaac Newton, be that as it may, spent most of his life, more life than he did studying calculus and physics, studying the Bible. Okay? And his... basically what he had to say was the knowledge of the universe, he compared it to a deep ocean. And he called himself, he said, I'm just a kid, a child playing on the shore. Okay? That was more or less the analogy he used. And maybe, getting my feet, just dipping my feet into this ocean of knowledge. Now that's Isaac Newton. Okay? And that kind of runs in parallel with this passage I just read from 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Okay, now if you jump over, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, okay, you can read about it. Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, let him become a fool that he may be wise. In other words, the concept of being born again, forgetting everything this world teaches you. Okay, now I'm not saying that literally. I mean, you still got to pay your bills. You still got to make your way in this world. But he's talking about in a spiritual sense. In other words, don't believe the evolutionists. Don't believe the global warming scam crowd, okay? God's in charge of the earth, okay? When it boils down to it, all right? For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God, for it is written, He taketh the wise in their own craftiness, and again, the Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, that they are vain. Okay, so you get the point, all right? The wisdom of this world is foolishness, unto God. Okay, now if you jump down, we can go to Galatians and just kind of reinforce this point. Okay, now this is the Apostle Paul. Now remember, Paul wasn't just, he was an educated man, okay, in the terms of he was a Pharisee, okay, he knew the Bible, just like the Pharisees did. He was highly educated, okay, he was the academic class. He was part of the Harvard, Chicago University, Berkeley crowd of his day, okay? The snob, the stuck-up, the holier-than-thou, the smarter-than-you stupid imbeciles out there in the masses university crowd. That's where he was coming from, okay? This is Paul in Galatians chapter 1, 11 and 12. But I certify you, brethren, that the gospel which was preached of me is not after man. For I neither received it of man, neither was I taught it, but by the revelation of Jesus Christ. So there you have it. Okay. Paul wrote most of the New Testament. Okay. And he's saying, I didn't learn this in school. I didn't learn this from the university crowd at Harvard or wherever he went, or whatever the school was at the, in his day. He's saying, this is revelation. Okay, so that's when I say God's simple salvation plan. When I say it's simple, it really is. Okay, you don't need to go to some confessional. Okay, you don't even need water baptism. Okay, and I know many people are gonna, other Christians, fellow Christians may even. Are going to jump all over me on that, but look, if you go back, you can go into Ephesians chapter 4, okay, and it talks about becoming a new man, okay. Now here it is. This is Ephesians chapter 4, that we henceforth be no more children tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive, parentheses, Federal Reserve System, evolution, etc. By speaking the truth in love may grow up into him all things which is the head, even Christ, for whom the whole body, fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying itself in love. Okay? So, there you have it. Okay? So, in other words, we're all part of the body of Christ. Now, Christ was baptized, by John the Baptist back there. Okay, if you go back in Matthew chapter 3, for example, okay, that's where it is. Okay, so he was baptized, and we're all part of that body. There's no reason for us to go and be physically baptized again. Okay, and here it talks about circumcision, which is basically, if you're going to be baptized, you might as well go and be circumcised, right? It's another physical act. Wherefore remember that ye being in the time past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision of the flesh made by hands, that at the time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, ye who sometimes were far off are made nigh by the blood of Christ. Okay, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances, for to make himself of twain one new man, so making peace, that he might reconcile both unto God in one body, the cross, having slain the enmity thereof. Okay, so in other words, and then just a little bit more. For through him we have access by one Spirit unto the Father. Now for you are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints into the household of God, built up unto the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ being himself the chief cornerstone, in whom all the building fitly framed together groweth up into a holy temple in the Lord, into whom you are builded together for an habitation of God through the Spirit. Okay. Now that is that's Ephesians chapter 2. Okay, and now just so you're in Jesus. Once you become a believer, that's it. Okay, you don't need to do anything physical. Catholic Church. Okay, again, experts at the Catholic Church. You don't need to go to a confessional. You don't need to be baptized. You don't need to do your 7 sacraments, whatever they used to call it. Okay, I was brought up a Catholic. That's it. Okay, and this concept is, that in the ages to come he might show the exceeding riches of his grace and his kindness toward us through Christ Jesus. For by grace you are saved through faith, and not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. Okay, again, this is Ephesians chapter 2. You can read this for yourself. Okay, but again, it's not of works, lest any man should boast. So work is circumcision, work is water baptism, work is some kind of procedure, not eating fish on Friday or whatever the rules are. Okay, and there's multiple examples throughout the New Testament. Okay, but the point is, Jesus' death covered everything. Okay, the Old Testament is gone. Whatever was done in the Old Testament. Now, of course, again, Jesus himself was baptized, but he had not been crucified yet, so the Old Covenant, Old Testament was still in effect. But by him arising, okay, and as I've just read, becoming part of his body, or part of the house, the spiritual house, or the temple, you're all set. Okay, but that doesn't mean you get to sit around and do nothing. Okay, go sit in some mega church somewhere and read some books and forget about it. Okay, because you have to, once you become aware of this, okay, you must let others know. Okay, you must spread the word. Okay, this is the parable of the talents in Matthew chapter 25. Okay, you can't just take this knowledge and do nothing with it. Okay, now it gets a little confusing if you read James chapter 2, and this is where people will say, well, the Bible contradicts itself. It says you don't have to do any work, and that it's supposed to be a day of rest and all this other thing. And James, let's just see if I can find that passage real quick. go over to James chapter 2, and I think this is where I want to find it. This is the end of James chapter 2, okay? For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. So what does that mean? Okay, I just got done reading Ephesians chapter 2 where it says there's no physical work to do to become saved. And now he could read James chapter 2, and it says right at the end here, 2:26, for the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. Now, what the hell's going on here? Pun intended. Okay, this is where many so-called experts will say, I see the Bible contradicts itself. It doesn't know what it's talking about. Okay, but again, this work, the work that's talking about in Ephesians that I just read, is all the procedures, the circumcision, the water baptism, the temple, the high priest, the Levitical priest going into the temple every year, the sacrifice for the people, okay, the goat, the two goats, Leviticus chapter 16, the goat and the scapegoat. By the way, the scapegoat that goes into the wilderness, Leviticus chapter 16, interesting background to that. Comes the Jewish word for that, Azazel. Azazel just so happens to be one and the same with, I believe, the Apollyon of Revelation chapter 9, but that's, again, the story for another day. Let's just get back to I don't want to go off on that right now, but the point is, all those procedures, that's the work that we don't need to worry about anymore. So you don't have to worry about going to church on Sunday. You don't have to worry about kissing the ring of the Pope or going to see the Pope or some pilgrimage to Mecca or getting circumcised or water baptism or any of that stuff. That's the work being referred to in Ephesians. Now, the work being referred to in James chapter 2 is, as I'm just saying, is that you have to harvest, okay? You have to spread the word, okay? You have to make others believers. You have to make others understand, okay, in any way you can, okay? That's the work, okay? Get people to read the Bible. Get people to believe. Get people that are, maybe have their faith in Donald Trump or something, or this concept of America, okay, without the Bible or something, human, okay, that don't have their faith, that don't have their in the right spot, okay. Don't listen to me, okay. I'm just parroting what's in the Old and the New Testament. That's in general. Okay, do this research for yourselves, okay? My site, boxofsunglasses.com, there's hundreds of citations, okay, on my site and my books, okay? But the point is that's the work, okay? You can read about this again. I want to say Matthew chapter 10, okay? Jesus says, look at the harvest. And also in John chapter 5, okay, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Okay, so in other words, the harvest is people. Okay, and this gets into the language of, the angels coming out and reaping the wheat and separating the wheats from the tares. Okay, and this sort of thing. Okay, Matthew chapter 3, again, it's illustrated by John the Baptist. But anyway, harvesting, okay, bringing people to the Lord, okay, that's the work, okay, and again, there's no schedule, there's no procedure, it's just kind of like what I'm doing right now, or trying to do, and hopefully, I don't know who's listening now, or who will listen, but hopefully they get this message, and it penetrates the God of this world, okay, the God of this world, 2 Corinthians 4:4, who's working through, his underlings, okay, the Federal Reserve owners, okay, as they spread their money, their filthy lucre, okay, 1 Timothy chapter 6, they spread it throughout the universities, academia, the media, okay, lust, okay, the greed, okay, Madison Avenue, neon lights, okay, that's, and, if you really want to go into MK Ultra and the CIA, mind control and all that, and I'm not going to go into that. I mean, it's out there. There's plenty of books on that. But again, follow the pyramid up. Okay, the CIA. I mean, where does the CIA is known as spooks? Just to cover that real quickly. Talk about mind control. Where do most of the spooks come from? They get the name spooks come from the Brotherhood of Death, or the tomb at Yale University, where most of these guys come from. The Bush family, the Rockefellers. Okay, Skull and Bones. Okay, but anyway, that's my take on MK Ultra. But the point is, it's all summarized in 2 Corinthians 4:4. The God of this world, whom all the people I just mentioned worship, has blinded a lot of people. Okay, not in a literal sense, but in a figurative sense. Okay, because again, most of the Bible is symbolic or figurative in nature. These morons that try to tell you the Bible is supposed to be taken literally and Israel is God's chosen people don't know what the blank they're talking about. Okay, and I'll just state that emphatically. They have no clue. Okay, as I've just the prime examples what I just talked about, works in James chapter 2 versus works in the book of Ephesians. Okay, that's a prime example. If you take the Bible literally, your head will be spinning. What do you mean? Okay, John chapter 9. I mean, Jesus tells the Pharisees, surely you don't mean we're blind also. And Jesus says, if you were blind, your sin would be forgiven, but because you say we can see, your sin remaineth. Now, what the hell is he talking about there? Well, very simply, he's talking about, the eye being opened. Serpent telling Eve, back there in the Garden of Eden, if you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, your eyes shall be opened. That's exactly what Jesus is talking about. In John chapter 9, he's going directly back to the Garden of Eden. But if you take the Bible literally, it doesn't make any sense. Okay? It's just the examples are just endless. And I don't want to, I could spend literally years on that concept. But this is where people get into trouble, okay? And this is where people get into, all kinds of screw-ups in the book of Revelation. Okay, this is why we have people running around saying, well, we still need a temple to be rebuilt in Jerusalem, and we still need some some guy with horns and 666 pasted on his forehead to show up on that rebuilt temple, and basically he's going to be the Antichrist, and, everybody's got to get stamped, and then we'll have a 7-year tribulation, and 3.5 years, we'll have the 2 witnesses, and it's all nonsense. It doesn't jibe. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, again, reality check is the world economy is about to collapse. Okay, China and Russia are ready for World War III. Okay, North Korea, not to mention, okay, these so-called religion of peace people that are coming into this country wholesale and in Europe, they're itching for World War III. The chaos is going to unfold, and it's going to happen relatively quickly, and it's not going to wait around. So John Hagee's, fantasy Antichrist can show up in some rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. I just read what the temple really is, and you can read about it too in Ephesians 2 and Ephesians 4. Okay? I don't know, the abomination of desolation, and, in the book of Daniel. He's talking about a human body. He's talking about a human temple. He's not talking about a physical temple. Okay? How can you abominate something that God doesn't even consider to be a temple anymore? Okay? You can read about that. Again, Stephen, the first martyr, and, recorded in the New Testament, Stephen in Acts chapter 7 says, how can God dwell in a temple made with hands? Okay, in the Old Testament, that's, when things were physical. Again, it's a totally different ballgame. Old Testament, New Testament, Old Covenant, New Covenant. How much more simple can it be made? Okay. So that's the point. Okay, again, on my site, God's Simple Salvation Plan, and it is simple. Okay, it's not easy. Okay, it's simple. There's a difference, okay, but it's not easy because most people are going to look at you and laugh at you. Okay, God's salvation plan is simple. Again, but it's not easy. All right. Website boxofsunglasses.com. Good night and God bless.